Hello everyone. My name is Stan Orchowski. I'm the Research Director at the Justice Research and Statistics Association. And on behalf of JRSA and our presenters, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on police planning and problem solving through incident-based reporting data. Before I turn this over to our presenters for this afternoon, I wanted to take just a minute and tell you a little bit about JRSA. JRSA is a national nonprofit organization. We are a membership organization, and our primary members are state statistical analysis centers, which are state agencies throughout the country who are charged with conducting policy-relevant research, statistical analysis, program evaluation for their states. There are SACs, as we call them, in every state and several of the territories. And JRSA is the organization that serves as a liaison between these state agencies and various federal government agencies. You can see our website up here. I would urge you, when the webinar is over, to take a few minutes and explore the website. There's a lot of valuable information on JRSA's website, which you can find at www.jrsa.org. I wanted to draw your attention to one part of the website which is relevant to today's presentation, and that is JRSA's Incident-Based Reporting Resource Center. We've had this project for many years thanks to funding from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and the goal of the project was to try to provide information to researchers and analysts who are interested in learning more about using incident-based data in general and specifically NIBRS-compatible incident-based data. If you look at this screen in front of you, you can see that there's a wealth of information on the website about NIBRS and about incident-based data, including downloadable code for reading the NIBRS file, information about NIBRS itself, and a number of reports and projects that have been done by state agencies, many of them done by the state statistical analysis centers, on using NIBRS data in their states to solve real problems and real policy questions. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as a resource, and again I would encourage those of you who want to know more about incident-based reporting to look at that, and if you have any questions, to contact us through the website, and we'll be happy to address those for you. On to the topic of today's webinar, police planning and problem solving through incident-based reporting data. Our presenters for today are Angie Baker and Rodney Eaton of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Angie is the director of the Oklahoma Statistical Analysis Center, which is housed in the Office of Criminal Justice Services at SBI, and Rodney Eaton is the supervisor of the Crime Reporting Field Services Unit at SBI. And this is a project that was funded by the American Statistical Association Committee on Law and Justice, funded with a small amount of money for to show how incident-based data can be used at the state level and at the local level to help with planning and problem solving. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our presenters, Angie and Rodney.
Okay, thank you very much. Today we're going to talk to you about some research that we did with police planning and problem solving through incident-based reporting. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go over the significance of the project. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the crime analysis program that we're in the process of creating. We're going to talk about the state incident-based reporting system, and then we'll go over the specific findings that we found for Muskogee. We'll talk a little bit about our methodology and findings, and then some of the implications that are practical for Muskogee Police Department. And then finally we'll entertain questions at the end. If you guys do have any questions at any time, you can select chat and it'll go to the moderator, which is Stan. So before I tell you about the significance of this specific project, I want to give you some context from an organizational perspective. The Oklahoma Statistical Analysis Unit is located within the Office of Criminal Justice Statistics at the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Our unit is located in the Information Services Division of the Bureau. Our division is also responsible for maintaining the statewide criminal history record repository, the collection, submission, and dissemination of crime statistics for the state, and issuing handgun licenses to applicants in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma SAC was consolidated into the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation in 2009 after the Oklahoma legislature abolished the Oklahoma Sentencing Commission. Because of our move, the SAC has gained access to multiple criminal justice data systems. Large amounts of the data were being collected, but no one was using those data for research purposes. Our first project when we came over was a needs assessment of all law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma. We used the results to create a research agenda, which continues to guide our work today. An overwhelming number of respondents requested that we conduct research related to domestic violence. They were also interested in research conducted using CYBERS data, which is our state incident-based reporting system. It's the equivalent of NIBRS. Finally, recognizing the push towards evidence-based policing strategies, respondents requested that we assist them with mapping crime in their jurisdiction. So with this information, we submitted a grant proposal to the American Statistical Association Committee on Law and Justice Statistics, which was funded through the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The goal of our project was to use our incident-based reporting system data to analyze a crime problem in a specific jurisdiction in hopes of not only demonstrating the utility of CYBERS data in assisting law enforcement in police planning and problem solving, but also to show the capabilities of CYBERS for future users. As a part of that, our unit is in the beginning stages of creating a crime analysis program for smaller agencies. Like other states, the largest cities in Oklahoma still report crime statistics in summary format. Most of our bigger agencies have advantages because they have crime analysis programs, intelligence analysts, and advanced mapping capabilities. Unfortunately, the smaller jurisdictions do not have the resources and is not fortunate to have these capabilities. We also wanted to collect this, do this research project because local jurisdictions are just collecting and submitting the data, and then whenever we receive it at OSBI, we convert it back to summary format and then turn it over to the FBI. Our hope is that we demonstrate the utility of CYBERS and also that we demonstrate the capabilities of CYBERS for future users. This gives you some idea of where we're headed. This is the direction we're moving toward. We'd like to provide a crime analysis services to the smaller CYBERS agencies. Right now we are in stage 1, which is the planning stage. As you can see up there, we are in the process of identifying the resources available to our agency. We're staffing the unit, conducting the initial meetings with administration, both at the local level and also with state officials. We are also conducting meetings with the Fusion Center, with university officials, and we're creating standard operating procedures. Finally, we're purchasing some software, some advanced mapping software. After the planning stage is complete, we'll start implementing the program. To do that, we'll identify additional CYBERS agencies, and then we're going to review the quality of their data based on some of the problems inherent to incident-based data and some of the problems that we've uncovered doing the Muskogee project. So based on our findings, we'll provide agency officials solutions or resources. And then at the most basic level, what we'd like to do is provide best practice recommendations. If we uncover a specific problem, for instance, with a specific person or a group, then we may forward that information on to the Fusion Center, which is also located in our agency. And if a problem proves to be ongoing or is long-term, then we may refer them to a local university and assist in coordinating the efforts. Basically, our response as a SAC will be based on the issues uncovered during the analysis of the CYBERS data. Next, you'll see the process. This is a basic outline, visual outline of what we see the crime analysis program looking like. So our intention is to use the following research that we're about to present to you as what we could offer the smaller agencies in Oklahoma. This was the first research project using incident-based reporting data for our state. We uncovered issues and limitations, some of which we expected and then others that we didn't. So before I tell you about what we know about what has become known as the Muskogee Project, I'm going to have Rodney Eaton tell you a little bit about incident-based reporting in Oklahoma. Here's Rodney Eaton.
Hello, I'm Rodney Eaton. I'm the Uniform Crime Reporting Program Manager for the state of Oklahoma. Give you a little bit of history on our Uniform Crime Reporting Program. Oklahoma was actually assigned to start the collection of crime statistics back in 1973. And the state of Oklahoma does have a state statute that says that crime reporting is mandatory in our state. So that does help us out to a certain degree. The law states that agencies should either report directly to the state repository or through their local sheriff's office. So we get the majority of our crime through that process. In 2002, or excuse me, up until 2002, we were collecting crime statistics in the Uniform Crime Reporting Summary format. 2002, after the events of 9/11-2001, our agency felt that we weren't doing enough in the area of crime collection and statistics. So in 2002, we put together an advisory board and started moving towards collecting NIBRS data. Our advisory board, excuse me just a second, our advisory board actually started steering us in the right direction as far as NIBRS collection, and in 2003 we began putting together the CYBRS system. As Angie mentioned, CYBRS just simply stands for State Incident-Based Reporting System. 2004 we began to implement the CYBRS system. At that time we mainly targeted smaller departments that did not have a records management system, and were able to begin the process that way. 2009 we received NIBRS certification from the FBI on the CYBRS program, and also that was the same year that the Statistical Analysis Center was relocated to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Okay, as you can see here, and this references what I was talking about earlier, in 2004 when we began to implement CYBRS, we got quite a few agencies very quickly. And that was, again, those were the smaller agencies. It was easy to make that switch because they did not have a records management system. And we dropped off sharply all the way through 2010. Then our numbers start going back up in 2011. That was because the significance of that is the Oklahoma Criminal Justice Resource Center merged with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. They had a records management system of their own called ODIS, which stands for Offender Data Information System. We interfaced with that product, and as you can see, starting in 2011 and 2012, our numbers rose sharply because those were those agencies that mainly interfaced with us at that time. These numbers have slightly changed a little bit, but at the time we put this presentation together, we had a total of 58 sheriff's offices out of a total of 77 counties. That represents about 75% of the sheriff's offices. Police departments, we had 176, representing about 80% of our police departments. We also have 4 tribal law enforcement agencies and 15 campus law enforcement agencies. The overall numbers sound fairly impressive, but when we do an analysis of our population covered, we're only covering about 39% of our overall population in the state in CYBRS, and we're collecting about 22% of the overall index crimes. The larger agencies, as Angie mentioned, we're working with them to make this switch, but we haven't been successful in doing that yet. A little bit further breakdown on the agencies. The agencies serving populations of less than 15,000. Again, those are the smaller agencies, about 88%, and then 12 agencies that serve at least 25,000 or more. And now I'm going to switch you back to Angie.
Okay, with some context on cybers as well as what we're planning on doing with the crime analysis program, now we'll move into some of the research findings and the actual research. So one of the first things that we want to talk about is why we chose Muskogee and why we chose domestic violence. Muskogee Police Department was selected for two reasons. Number one, at the time that we wrote the grant proposal, they were our largest contributing agency. And also, they consistently contributed data to cybers. Our research focused on domestic violence for two reasons as well. Number one is domestic violence continues to be prevalent, and it is also an issue that was brought up by Chief Eskridge, who's the Chief of Police at Muskogee, as a relevant issue. Finally, if you refer back to the initial needs assessment that OSDI did when we first came over from the office, from OCJRC, 62% of respondents requested that we conduct research related to domestic violence. So those are the reasons we chose Muskogee and domestic violence. This is some of the demographic information about Muskogee. This is Census Bureau data, which will give you some context for the research. Muskogee is the 11th largest city in the state, and it also has one of the most diverse cities in Oklahoma. That's in part due to the large American Indian population, which is due to the relocation of tribes from the East Coast. In the mid-1970s, the city experienced a dramatic shift in its socioeconomic makeup, and today almost 26% of residents live below the poverty line. There's a real small middle class, and 40% of homes in Muskogee are rental properties. On average, the Muskogee Police Department receives about 34,000 calls for service each year. The department employs 104 with 91 commissioned employees and 13 civilian workers. Muskogee residents do have access to many victim service programs. They have a batterers intervention program. They have one shelter with, I think, about 20 beds. They do have some resources and victim services available to them. Another reason this is important is due to LEOCA, our law enforcement killed and assaulted in the line of duty. Officers in assaults in Muskogee that are disturbance calls, which include family quarrels, 55% of those officer assaults occurred during a disturbance call. In 2009 and 2010, they reported 34 officers' assaults. Of those, about 60% were disturbance calls, which includes domestics. And then of those reported assaults, the officer was physically injured 73.7% of the time. In comparison, for all other calls, the officer was physically injured 40% of the time. So now that I've given you some context about the city, I'll talk to you about the research. This goes into some of our methodology. Our thought was to use all the information cybers had to offer, so we had to use a mixed methods approach. There are four main ways to extract domestic violence incidents from cybers. You can use the flag on the administrative segment, you can use the specific offense code, and you can use the specific crime statute. What we did is we used the incident type and then the relationship code. For our research, in addition to the NIBRS elements, we also collected data on ethnicity of both victim and offender, location and address, and then the narrative. We pulled the following relation types: spouse, common law spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-spouse, parent, step-parent, grandparent, child, stepchild, child of boyfriend, girlfriend, grandchild, sibling, and step-sibling. And we also included 8 crimes in our analysis, which were homicide, forcible rape, forcible sodomy, sexual assault with an object, forcible fondling, aggravated assault, simple assaults, and intimidation. In order for us to conduct the analysis, we also had to calculate some variables. We had to capture the day of the week, basically using a calendar. We had to include zip codes because they weren't, Muskogee wasn't entering those into cybers. We also had to calculate the longitude, latitude for the mapping. We put the victim and offenders in age groups, and then we coded for the presence of a weapon. We also developed a separate database to determine the total number of victims and offenders, as well as the total number of repeat victims and offenders. For the content analysis, or for the narrative, we plan to code for injuries, weapons, presence of children, drugs and alcohol, and victim offender activity. For the mapping analysis, we added missing zip codes and then calculated longitude, latitude using cybers addresses in batchgeo.com. We used, for our analysis, we ended up using CrimeStat3, and we used a Google map of Muskogee to provide context, and then nearest neighbor clustering was used to identify clusters of domestic violence, and basically incidents were captured. So for descriptive statistics, we had a sample size of 1,509, In 2009 and 2010, 13.5% of the victims were repeat victims and 14.9% were repeat offenders. The majority of domestic violence incidents were simple assaults. Law enforcement responded to the most calls between 9 and 11:59. The majority of incidents occurred in the residence or home. Personal weapons were the most common weapon used during the incident, which includes hands, feet, or fists. The majority of incidents involved boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. The victim was a female in 72% of cases, and the offender was a male in 74% of the reported incidents. The average age of the victim was 31, and the average age of the offender was 33. This tells you about the calls of service by month. In 2009 and 2010, Muskogee Police Department entered 8,108 incident reports into cybers. Of those, 18.6% were related to domestic violence. Service calls by day of week. Domestic violence calls were evenly distributed across the days of the week. Service calls by time of day. Law enforcement responded to the most calls between 9 and 11:59. I just want to point out that this is when they responded to the most calls. This table is not intended to represent when the incident actually occurred, just when it became known to law enforcement. This tells you a little bit about the incident type for the crimes, the 8 crimes that we used. This gives you some idea about the location of the incidents. The most common was the residence or the home, followed by highway, road, or alley. We did have one incident in a jail and prison, and we had some questions about that, so we looked that up, and that was a case of a family that went to visit somebody that was in jail, and the mother didn't want the daughter talking to the person that was in jail, so she pushed the phone out of her hand, and that was reported to the law enforcement. Personal characteristics, the weapon. Personal weapons were by far the majority of the weapons used. 14% of the time there was no assault. Injury to the victim. There was no injury or minor injury to most of the victims. We did have 2 homicides in this data set. This just gives you a visual of the victim sex as well as the offender sex. And then this gives you an idea of victim and offender race. This is pretty much lines up with the demographics of the area, with the exception of the American Indian population that's underrepresented. This is the age of the victim by percent. This is the average age of the victim was 31. And these next 2 slides are going to give you information on the age of the victim. It's independent of the relationship between the two. So this is not the victim-offender relationship. This is just the age of the victim and then the age of the offender. And then this slide is based on the victim-offender relationship, not the age of the victim. For instance, a child on this chart could be 40 years old but still be the child of an offender. This table will capture relationships and not the age of the victim. So I want to point that out. The majority of incidents involved an intimate relationship, followed by a child. The next part of our analysis, we went into the narratives. As part of this project, we wanted to conduct a content analysis of the narrative. A content analysis is just a qualitative research tool, and our hope was to find more detailed information about the incident. We were most interested in looking at the presence of children, drugs and alcohol, and weapons, and then comparing those data to what were captured in the offense segment. We immediately ran into issues with the narratives because the narrative field, while encouraged to law enforcement, is an optional field in cybers. The narratives were handwritten, unfortunately, and then stored on a single terminal at the Muskogee Police Department. And because of this, I had to make 3 trips to Muskogee PD to pull the narratives off of that terminal. We calculated a sample size for 2009 just to see if we could see anything significant, because we had limited resources to actually type in every narrative. Then we entered the narratives into text analytics for surveys. We developed the following categories: the injuries, weapons, drug and alcohol, and presence of children, offender and victim activity. So we entered 252 narratives. On average, they included 4 lines of typed text. They may have been longer handwritten by the officer, but they were only 4 lines of typed text. The longest was 46 lines, and the shortest was just 1 line, and the line said, "The victim suspect assaulted one another." The majority of narratives only included the date, time, location, and type of call. And one of the big problems that we ran into in Muskogee is that they have a family violence report, and while most jurisdictions in Oklahoma have some version of this, law enforcement uses this as their primary place to capture information about the scene and the victim. So the condition of the victim and offender, emotional state of the victim offender, and location of the injuries, as well as any description of the scene or presence of children, none of that was captured in the narrative because they were capturing it on the family violence report. The reason why they do that is because at the bottom of the family violence report they have a Safeline card that they're required to hand out to every victim. So it would have been double work for them to enter it into the narrative. I wouldn't have known about the family violence reports if I didn't go to Muskogee PD, so I did not use them in my analysis. And then the last part is the mapping. And the final part of this project was the mapping portion. Cybers has a built-in mapping function which we thought would automate the process, making it feasible to replicate this for other jurisdictions in the future. Unfortunately, the mapping function is not working, so we used CrimeStat to develop some basic cluster maps of domestic violence calls for service. And these are just our calls for service. When we showed this to Chief Eskridge, he knew exactly what areas those were. Those are 2 apartment complexes, and they're pretty much the same for 2009 and 2010. So these are just basic incident counts. And in the future, we'd like to do some predictive policing and do some more advanced mapping. We don't have the capabilities right now, and we want to automate the process as much as possible so that we will have a quicker turnaround time when we do the crime analysis program for other jurisdictions. So some of the practical limitations that we had, the first thing that we knew about were the zip codes. We knew that they weren't in there and that we were going to need them to do the mapping. So we had to enter all the zip codes for every incident. The narratives were missing in most cases, so we had to populate that field with information. One of our biggest problems were the family violence reports because most of the information that we were after in the narrative was actually in the family violence report. And then we also had limited mapping capabilities in Cybers, which prevents us from doing some advanced predictive policing or offering some information to the law enforcement agency. When we presented this to Chief Eskridge in late June, he was very excited about it. He was very excited about the implications, and he said that what he would use this information for is not only to identify hotspots that he knows are there, but with this push toward evidence-based policing and intelligence-led policing, he knows they're there. He just needs to have the numbers to show it. But he said this also will help him understand trends and crime statistics and characteristics. And then he asked us if it would be helpful for them to populate the narrative filled with text, and we told him that it would. And then also the final product of this research is that we had to create a resource guide which we hope that the officers would use. Every Muskogee police officer is going to get the resource guide, and so this is when we really started talking to the chief to ask him what elements he would be interested in seeing in the resource guide. And so this is the contents of the statistical resource guide after the analysis was completed, as well as Chief Eskridge's input. We're going to put in there the state statutes related to domestic violence, some basic information on the dynamics of domestic abuse. In Oklahoma, officers are not required to have ongoing domestic violence training, so this is going to just be a quick reference guide for them on the dynamics of domestic violence. We're also going to have a brief area about project findings. He really recommended that we have some officer safety tips in there, and then also we'll include some of the LEOCA statistics. He and we agree that victim information, including a lethality assessment, Campbell's lethality assessment, will be included as a tool to help assess the situation and the dangerousness for the victim. We're also going to include an area about domestic violence reporting, and then we're going to give them some local and state resources. Officers are also going to have an area for notes. And so what will happen when the guide is completed and published is every law enforcement officer in Muskogee will receive this guide in hopes that they will use it. And with that, we will entertain any questions you may have.
Thanks, Angie and Rodney. I have a question for you about, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about those family violence reports, where they are, what's in them, and whether you would be able to access them for the future.
Sure. The family violence report that Muskogee uses includes the day, time, location, and then the area of occurrence. It also gives a little bit of victim information and suspect information. Some of the fields that are on there are the physical condition of the victim, the physical condition of the suspect, if children were present, the relationship, if a weapon was used, if the officer felt threatened by either the suspect or the victim, or was assaulted by the suspect or the victim, any action taken by them. And then also there are diagrams and a summary of injuries. So there's diagrams of a female body and a male body, and they can locate or mark with an X where the injuries were. In the future, it would be interesting to have this information. I would not have known about the family violence report in this jurisdiction had I not had access to the narratives. So since it was outside the scope of the research, I didn't include it in this research, but I think that Muskogee would be willing to let us have access to this in the future.
Okay, we have several questions here from our webinar participants. Since there's often address changes of people who are involved in domestic violence incident or relationship changes, and people can still be victims or suspects, how did you capture the repeat incidents?
One moment.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question again?
As many parties involved in domestic violence often change addresses or relationships, yet can remain victims or suspects, how do you capture repeat incidents?
For this research, we basically just did the overall count. We didn't look so much into the repeat offenses at this time, or now we can do that in our system because the cyber system actually collects personal information, names, addresses, telephone numbers, things of that nature, work information, Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, so on and so forth. But for this study, we simply looked at the counts or the numbers that occurred in a particular calendar year.
Thanks. Next question was, are you collaborating with the local domestic violence agency or state coalition in developing the guide that you mentioned?
Yes, we are. We do collaborate with them. We have a victim witness coordinator down there. Her name is Kim Bayless, and she is going to provide us the information on the domestic violence, the dynamics of domestic violence. So we do collaborate with our local as well as those that are in the area, in the Muskogee area.
Okay. And another question, have you considered using the arrest outcomes data in the cyber system as part of a next step with your analysis, the outcomes?
I would have loved to have used the arrest data in the administrative segment, and I will consider doing that in the future. We didn't do it in this, and that is something I wish we would have done. But in the future, we will do that.
Okay. I almost hesitate to ask this one, but do you anticipate that the larger cities in your state will start reporting incident-based crime statistics, and if so, would you do similar research in those jurisdictions?
We are the largest jurisdictions that we are missing are Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Broken Arrow, Norman, and Lawton, and they have their. Okay, so to answer your first question, they are both. I think Oklahoma City and Tulsa are both close. It's a funding issue. Oklahoma City is transferring to a new record management system that they've been in the process of developing for about the last 15 years, and for whatever reason, it's just been a little slower. So whenever they implement their new records management system, they promise that at some point they'll interface with cybers. As far as doing any analysis for them or offering this program to them, they have a lot of in-house analysis capabilities. In fact, they're one of our references, one of our guides to help us. They have a lot of resources, especially Oklahoma City and Tulsa. So we might collaborate with them, but I'm not sure that we would do some analysis for them. We do program evaluations for Oklahoma City.
Okay. I wonder if you could address any more, you mentioned the police chief's enthusiasm. Do you have any idea of how this data, are they going to be doing any targeted policing based on the data, or make any tactical changes based on the information you provided? Do you have any sense of what they might be doing in the future?
Sure. Well, I think the first step is that when we give them the statistical resource guide, Chief Eskridge said that what he thinks the main problem is that he needs to work on changing the mindset of the officers, and that they just need additional education and awareness. So he feels like that presenting them with this resource guide is an opportunity for him to readdress this. As far as if they will use this to make tactical or operational decisions, I'm not sure. He was really focused on increasing the awareness and the knowledge of his officers. That's the part he was real excited about, I think. And I think working,
okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to go on to another question, but if you have something to add, please do.
Okay, I was just going to say that he also emphasized that he would like to work closer with the victim advocates and the victim community in the area, so we could encourage that collaboration.
All right, another question from one of our participants. Do you think this would be useful if the same kind of analysis was repeated for sexual assault?
I think this would be useful for any crime. I think it would be useful for sexual assault. What will happen in the future for the jurisdiction, we'll go to the jurisdiction and ask them about what issue they want us to research, or we'll do a preliminary analysis to see if we recognize any problems in their area. But I think you can apply the same ideas for any crime.
Okay. Another question about recording information about whether there are any weapons in the house, and if anyone in the house has a permit for a weapon, and whether you have that information anywhere for further use by officers.
We do not. We do have, those would be in separate places. There is a field for weapons, and we did have a few firearms, but we don't have, there was nothing, that would probably have been captured in the narrative. There's nowhere in cybers that says if this person has a gun that they have a license to carry it. So we don't have that, and some officers may put that in the narrative, but those would be in two different places probably from where we're sitting.
Okay. Another question came in about what record management system Muskogee uses, and was the RMS a benefit or a liability in the study you conducted?
I'm going to ask Rodney real quick. Let me tell you about something about Muskogee really quick. Is that whenever we selected them, they were a regular contributor to Cybers. What happened was they got a new system, and then they had to go back to summary reporting almost immediately after we concluded the study. So until they're back now contributing to Cybers. What is the name of the RMS system? It's New World. They're using New World. So New World is a certified vendor. They can interface with Cybers. But it was interesting that as soon as we finished our study, they had to go back to summary reporting just until they could get everything on board and get everything in place. So it was New World, and it was New World, and they do still submit CYBERS data.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this, but does the agency, I assume that means the Muskogee PD, use a domestic violence response team to provide services, and whether or not there's any information that's generated by the team?
We actually just had a meeting about a CCR team, a community response team. They do not have an active one. There was a meeting. I think that they have it, and then it goes away, and it kind of loses some steam, and then it comes back. But right now, they do not have a CCR team or a community response team.
Okay, and another question about the, I guess about the colleges that are reporting to CYBERS. Have they incorporated any of the new Clery Act requirements for reporting domestic violence, dating violence, stalking incidents?
I'm going to give this to Rodney and let him answer that. I'll tell him what the question is. They want to know if the campuses that are reporting have implemented any requirements.
Exactly which new requirements are you referring to?
Well, I couldn't tell you because it's not my question. Perhaps the person that asked the question could. This just refers to the Clery Act requirements.
The Clery Act requirements are separate than the requirements that they have to report to us at the state level. But those, they kind of go hand in hand because we can actually help them as far as when they are submitting their reports to Clery. The CYBERS data, we can actually extract some of that information from the CYBERS data to help them with their report. If I understand correctly, the Clery report actually follows closer to a uniform crime reporting summary format than it does an IVR format. I hope I answered the question.
There's another question here about the domestic violence flag in the administrative segment of the record and whether that was useful or is useful for analysis.
We do have the domestic violence flag in our administrative segment. However, we have many other options that the officer can choose from, and the choices that they make are not necessarily wrong or right. If there was an arrest made, for example, in a domestic violence situation, he could have clicked on that as an arrest as opposed to a domestic violence situation, and then if we tried to pull the information from that particular field, we would have missed those. So that's why we chose to look at the relationship code and then cross-reference that with the crimes that we looked at, the crime categories.
There's a question here about whether there's a method of a long-term method in place for tracking children exposed to domestic violence to identify the % that end up as adult victims or suspects.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to switch you back to Angie.
Okay, there are some efforts at the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services to follow that group, to follow a group like that, but right now that is not being done. But there are some meetings about following a group in a specific area.
Well, I'm going to ask you the last question. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to send them to me now. Someone wanted to know about the resources that the project took. How long did the project take, and what kinds of resources I guess you devoted to the project?
Sure.
And I guess I would add to that, before you answer, I would add to that, any sort of recommendations you have for how, other folks that want to take this on, things that they could do or look for, and particularly maybe, and if you could address that issue of the narratives. And would you think that you would find more information in the narratives if you went to, a different police department, or if you, could have gotten to those family violence reports? But the general question is about resources.
Okay, sure. We started the project in March of 2010, and the final product will be due at the end of the month. We actually put a lot of resources toward it. We didn't realize how labor intensive it was going to be because we knew the zip codes weren't there, but we didn't know the narratives weren't there. We knew there were going to be some issues with the narratives, but we didn't know how intensive it was going to be. So what it actually involved is having some of my staff enter the narratives, hand type them, and then we put them in Excel, and then we put them into SPSS text analytics. So it was very labor intensive, and some of the challenges that I think that might be universal would probably be the quality of the narratives. One, because they're an optional field in Oklahoma, and then also because officers have guidelines of what they should put in the narrative, but they put whatever they want to put in the narrative. So I think that some of the challenges are just going to be the crime mapping because of the zip code, which we actually in some of our other jurisdictions, one thing that we would do I think different is we would definitely do a preliminary analysis or just review their data and to see what we're looking at, what we're dealing with, so we knew what type of resources we were going to have to dedicate to the project. We knew, like I said, going in that we were going to have problems with the zip codes. We didn't understand the full extent of the problem we were going to have with the narrative, which is why I'm a little disappointed with the content analysis with the whole narrative portion, and would have liked to include the family violence reports. That's another thing, is that to avoid a lot of paperwork, they are more likely to put it in the family violence report that's required because they hand them the SafeLine card than to put it into the narrative. So then the narrative just ends up being one line that says the type of call and a basic one-line description. So it was very labor intensive. It required more resources than I anticipated, and I think that in the future we will look at the data a little closer before we agree to do it, or work with them to get their data, at least understand what we're dealing with a little bit better. This was our first try. This is the first project that has ever been done using Oklahoma incident-based reporting data. There's one project that the university is doing right now. The University of Central Oklahoma is doing a burglary study using Cyber's data in Stillwater, and they run into some of the same issues, but this was the first time we've tried using this data to do any type of research. So we learned a lot of lessons, I think.
All right. Well, all right.
Are there any other questions?
That's all we have. We will have, for those of you who have colleagues who missed the presentation and are interested, if you go to the JRSA website, we will have a recording of the presentation along with the slides available for you to view. Give us a little bit of time, but we will get that up sometime next week. When you hang up from or disconnect from the webinar, you will see an evaluation form. We would greatly appreciate it if you would take a couple of minutes, only a couple of questions, and just answer the questions so that we can better get ourselves prepared for future webinars and see if we want to explore this kind of information further, and so forth and so on. So thank you very much to Angie and to Rodney for today's presentation, which was very interesting and helpful. Thanks to all of you who attended the webinar. Please don't forget to check out the JRSA website and the incident-based reporting website and to fill out the evaluation. Have a great afternoon.